Okay, stop. Yes, all right, we are now recording. Thank you for reminding me, Shauna.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar, Managing Parks and Open Space During a Pandemic. It's very topical, and this topic was brought to our attention by WestCOG, who are co-hosting with us today. So let's get into it. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Okay. Before we get into the content, I want to go over the Zoom meeting, just some housekeeping for today. So our presentation is being recorded. I'm going to go through content, and we have a couple of guest speakers who I think will lend some really interesting perspectives to our conversation today. The content should take about 40 or 45 minutes, and then we've reserved about 15 minutes for question and answers. If there are many question and answers, we're happy to keep the conversation going within reason. So if you want to stay on, please feel free to join us. Otherwise, we'll end at 1 o'clock. Please do save your questions for the end. And there's a few ways to chime in if you do have a question. Stephanie, who is producing today's webinar, has muted you all upon entry. The video function is optional, and then the chat function is available for questions, and you can also raise your hand. And we apologize for such stringent, I don't know what to call them, Stephanie, but just controls,
security rules, yeah.
But we know more and more these meetings are getting Zoom bound, so we're trying our best to, keep this presentation legitimate and family friendly. So last but not least, this is available for 1 CM credit. If you are a certified planner, you can type into the APA website the title, and you can find us, and it's hosted by Fitzgerald and Halliday. Okay, next slide, please. Well, I don't need to tell you this, but we are living through an extraordinary time. And the pandemic has upended our life as we know it. It's changed the way that we use our free time, how and where we work, how and where we go out, how we worship, go to school, all that stuff. It's also really impacted how people are using open space. So even as lockdowns throughout our state are eased, the changing nature of responding to life in a pandemic will be felt indefinitely. We're going to talk today about, different positive methods for managing open space if you are a land manager, and using open space if you are just a member of the public, while adhering to social distancing regulations. Next slide, please. So I'd like to give you a little bit of context for how this webinar even came to be. So the SPAN grant is 2-year funding allocated by the CDC to 16 different states. And now working with Connecticut's Department of Public Health, Capital Region Council of Governments, or CROG, has served as the trustee for this funding for all the state. So interested COGs approach CROG with proposals for how to increase active transportation within their regions. Now, I work for FHI, and as a consultant to CROG, we have developed branding for this initiative. We're currently in year 2, and it's called Active CT. So you'll see the logo there. Initiatives under this grant funding have included streetscape demonstration projects, planning, procurement, and community education, including this webinar. So WestCOG reached out to CROG, interested in hosting a webinar on this topic, given the specific challenges within their communities during the past several months. Next slide, please. So I'll introduce today's panelists. My name is Shauna Kitzman. I'm a project manager with Fitzgerald Halliday. I'm based in our Hartford office. I'm the deputy project manager for Active CT, and I also serve as a member of my town of West Hartford's Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. We're joined by Jim Wood, who is a retired Fairfield police officer and currently serves as a park ranger for the Aspetuck Land Trust. I think he'll lend a really interesting perspective because he's been in the thick of it throughout. We're also joined by First Selectman of Newtown, Dan Rosenthal, to talk about their town's CodeRED automated service related to their greenway. And then I have my trusty colleague and team member, Stephanie, who is my web producer, and will also lead you through some of the case studies that we want to share. Next slide. Okay, we're going to break down the content today in 4 separate sections or themes. So we'll talk about proactive open space management. We'll talk about digital communication tools, of which there are many. We're going to talk about creative campaigns and ways to continue encouraging use of open space. And we'll talk about best practices. Now, I say best practices because I understand that rules and regulations change weekly, if not daily, and the goalposts continue to shift. So what might be a best practice today might not be the best practice next week or even this weekend. Next slide, please. All right, so we'll dig into open space management. You can go to the next slide. So early in the pandemic, a lot of us sought respite from our homes. Like I mentioned, many of our businesses and places of work were closed. And according to the CDC, being outside at a socially distant, being socially distant from others was considered and still is considered one of the safest places to be in public while avoiding COVID-19. Almost instantly and across the state, open space use increased dramatically. So that led to overcrowding of our parks, trails, beaches, you name it. A lot of open space managers and municipalities were forced to shut down simply because they didn't have the resources to manage or they didn't have adequate parking to handle the crowds. Now we're moving into phase 2 here in Connecticut of reopening. I would say it's even a murkier time. And as we navigate what's open, what's not, what's appropriate, you know, it's a confusing time for all of us. And we want to understand, you know, how can we keep our parks, trails, and open space open and do it safely? I did want to mention that, you know, a lot of the municipalities and land managers were forced to carefully consider opening or partially opening to meet the demand of the public, or closing either fully or partially, and keeping residents safe. And that is under best case circumstances. So that is assuming that they had adequate staff, that they didn't have staff out sick, either sick with coronavirus or caring for friends or family, and that they had, you know, the resources. A lot of places are losing funding or have to deal with reduced resources, layoffs, and the like. So we do want to acknowledge that there are many challenges at play right now. Next slide, please. The upshot is people, you know, have really discovered or rediscovered their parks and open spaces. And as planners, we really want to encourage use of being outside and being physically active. We don't want to punish or deter people from, you know, using parks or trails. I think as planners, this is awesome. And I hope that people's, you know, being exposed to these facilities that Connecticut has to offer is really wonderful. And I hope that, you know, people continue to use them. Our parks and trails and open space are our community's gems. So we want to have, you know, we want to encourage their use. let's consider how to positively manage these spaces while promoting physical activity and a sense of community and people's personal well-being, because I think we're all a little starved for those right now. Next slide, please. So this slide largely applies to land managers, but if you're the land manager, determine your roles. Be upfront and transparent, and be clear that your guidance from either federal, state, or local authorities changes constantly. I think most people will be receptive to that. If you're a land manager and you have a trail, you might direct slower walkers or families to stay to the right and have faster people stay on the left. You might direct groups to organizing to single file to accommodate oncoming, pedestrians or bicyclists. For smaller facilities, such as land trusts, you might have users sign an agreement before they are allowed into your facility. And it promotes personal accountability, and people must demonstrate that they understand the rules that they must adhere to while they're on your facility. Another strategy is to have a one-way in, one-way out, and visitors must wait their turn if the facility or parking areas are at capacity. In a little bit, I'll go over some of the ways to communicate these and forms of signage. Next slide, please. So to my earlier point, we want to enforce, use of open space with friendliness and creativity. So in order to meet the increased demand, you might consider hiring ambassadors, which can serve as friendly faces to your facilities. You might, enlist current staff or volunteers, or even consider creating a new role or multiple roles. Ambassadors can direct visitors to specific areas that you want them to use, or if one area is overcrowded, you can sort of be on the ground managing people on where they can go, or direct them to programming that you might have set up that is appropriate for social distancing measures. Management to the best that you're able should be, helpful rather than authoritarian. I think we have to just be empathetic and understand we're all in this together and we're all navigating it together. And it's a hard time. Given that your municipality or your organization may not have the resources to pay staff, you might also want to partner with local neighborhood groups or stewards of your park or trail area. These people are often very invested in the education and beautification and management of these spaces, and tend to act as stewards and can be leveraged as such. Last but not least, there's opportunity to get creative with enforcement. I have a bullet that says chicken poop on there, and there was a city in Sweden that during the pandemic, in order to deter people from going to this major city park to celebrate the end of winter, they spread about 2,000 pounds of chicken manure. And not only did the smell keep people away, but it also fertilized the ground. So I will say get creative, but still be environmentally conscious with your measures. Next slide. And we'll go through digital communication tools, and there are many. And I'm not going to get into every one, but I want to draw your attention to a couple. As mentioned, all of these are linked. This will be posted to WestCOG's website after the fact. The DEEP has a great website. They have a lot of tips and tricks for where to go, what's open, what parking regulations are, and so on. They also have a Twitter feed that keeps updated listings about parks, beaches, and other facilities, and notifies the public of when they close, mostly due to parking. Parking is at capacity. So that's a really good resource to follow. Connecticut Forest and Park Association has some really good tips and tricks for visiting trails that are less traveled or visiting open space at time that's less populated. So as you can imagine, the peak times are between 12 and 4 p.m. That's when all of our facilities tend to attract the most visitors. A sunny day, a sunny weekend, forget about it. But they do include tips on, go on a cloudy day, go early in the morning, or try to find a less populated area. So I encourage you to poke around these resources, and if there's anything that you see up there and really like, you might want to borrow and post to your own facility's website or social media. I did want to draw your attention to a forthcoming resource that I think will be really appreciated here in Connecticut. Through this SPAN grant, we are also working with the Connecticut Trail Census to create a statewide Connecticut Trail Finder. So that's an online resource. It's a website, and it will be 100% trail manager approved content. And there are similar resources currently in Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. They're really professional, beautiful websites, and it's a really good way for our trail managers to really own and manage the messaging and how to communicate with the public about what their trails have to offer. So that'll be within the next year. Next slide, please. So it's critical to be as proactive as possible, and I understand you can't always be proactive as situations change very quickly, or the park might be open at 1:30 and then might have to close at 2 due to parking capacity. So different ways to get the word out, and I encourage you to use different methods because people consume their information in different ways. But if you have a website, maintain current information as best you can up front and center. You might save someone the trip to go out and be disappointed when they get to their, the reservoir and it's closed because it's at capacity. If you have social media, use that. That's a really good way to get your message out, depending on what your audience, how active they are on your social media feeds. Many towns and nonprofits have contact databases with e-blasts that they are able to send up to the minute information. And then some larger towns and cities do have, Office of Communications or public relations person who can manage press releases and such. But obviously this depends on the size of your community or your organization and the kind of staffing that you have. Jim will talk a little bit about an intern that the Aspetuck Land Trust enlisted to help with a lot of this, these tasks. We also have Dan Rosenthal will talk a bit about Newtown's automated text alerts. And, again, this is leveraging your contact database and sending people text for up to the minute information, and it can be used for parks or trails information. Last but not least is good old-fashioned signage. Many towns have variable message signage available. If you have a town hall, you can perhaps change the messaging out front. Some land trusts even use handmade signs or temporary signage leading up to your open space or at your open space. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm sure you know, but there are many smartphone apps available. And I want to draw attention to these because they do help the public to learn and share content about different trails. And they provide broad exposure to many lesser known trails. So the thing is, it's not that there's any lack of trails in Connecticut, it's just that people tend to go where they know and just might not have awareness about many of our hidden gems. So again, I encourage you to poke around these resources and just see what appeals to you. On many of these resources, people can search by, geography and, skill level and those kind of resources or other filters. Next slide, please. In terms of crowdsourced interactive mapping and gamification tools, these are other tools available for people to see recommended routes or, to even add data so that they can, add a route or, for OpenStreetMap, it's a community GIS, like a Wikipedia for maps, so users can edit data. If you're a land manager, you might want to look into this and change the, update the data that the community is seeing about your trail or open space. I will say Yukon Clear hosted a really good webinar on May 4th that really dove into a lot of these resources. That is available on their website, and I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in any of these tools and having a bit of a deeper dive. I did want to draw your attention quickly to the last bullet, geocaching, which is a fun, family-friendly activity to get people outdoors. It's a mix of like hiking and treasure hunting, which sounds awesome. But due to COVID, there's ongoing shifting protocols and guidelines due to geocaching. So I encourage you to either check out the geocaching website or DEEP has some guidelines that they update regularly. Next slide. Okay. So I'll just go through this quickly, but if you're a land manager, you might want to take ownership of the information that people are reading about your trail. If you want to identify a new trail, it just has to start and end in a parking area, even a couple spaces warrants a parking area. It's another good way to get the resources out, especially if you're a smaller facility. You can literally get your park or trail on the map, and you can direct where you want people to park and that sort of thing. For the public, I encourage use of these applications to find less crowded trails. And to, you can sort according to popularity and, maybe go to that 1-star rated trail and, see for yourself if it really is not the best. But the other one is it helps you try something new. I mean, it really encourages creativity. Yeah. Okay, next slide. We can run through some creative campaigns to continue encouraging use of our public and open space. So one silver lining of the pandemic is that people have an increased awareness of how important it is to be in nature right now. We're craving being outside for mental and physical wellness, and we want people to keep doing that. I mean, it's healthy from a public health perspective and mental health. So there are some creative campaigns that you can use or implement to reinforce that we're all in this together. It sucks. We have to figure out ways to come together as communities. These pictures shown are a campaign that was launched in Christchurch, New Zealand after their earthquakes. And it was just, acknowledging that we get it. These times are tough and we understand that, we all need to get out of the house. Next slide, please. So I understand that many towns and organizations are, strapped for cash or resources, especially as they've been called to deal with very specific pandemic-related tasks. But don't underestimate the creativity and the power within your own communities. I think a lot of people want to show up. Some people have time as other things have been canceled. There's different ways to string together walks. It could be like an architecture walk, or during pandemic, there was kids were drawing rainbow art and putting it in their windows, and there was, maps that people created, and you can go on like a rainbow hunt. And I think there's a lot of different ways to encourage people to get outside, and it doesn't necessarily have to be at a park or a trail. It's a really cool way to encourage exploration of native species. So again, I would just encourage tapping into people that are already invested in you or your organization or your town, and kind of let them take some ownership Next slide, please. I personally love using walking and teaching my kids to ride bikes in a local cemetery. It's well managed, the trees and nature are beautiful, it's peaceful. I would say encourage use of non-parks as long as they're open to the public and, you know, as long as people understand the rules and can use it respectfully. Next slide. This is another really great time to support, you know, local farm stands, local farms. And while people can shop local and understand, you know, the food that's grown in their own backyard, it's a way for them to get outside and does not require group setting. You know, you can go pick some stuff up, maybe pick some fruit, and you're still outside and with nature. Next slide, please. And if your community doesn't have, you know, a lot of alternates to, you know, a park or an open space, it's really incredible what you can do to encourage social distancing with some, you know, maybe some hula hoops and some spray chalk or some paint. You know, my favorite social distancing creature in this picture is the dog who is staying in their circle, and that is a very well-trained dog. So I gotta teach my dog to do that. And with that, I will hand it over to Stephanie to talk through some best practices, and we'll hear from our friends, Jim and Dan as well.
Hi, thanks everyone. So, you know, we just wanted to show what local municipalities are doing, and doing a lot with little resources and very little time. So we're going to be taking a quick look at 3 case studies. The first is from Burlington, Vermont, which is, you know, within the general New England area, similar sized town that we might find in Connecticut. We'll have Selectman Rosenthal speak briefly about a CodeRED system, which was used in Newtown to promote social distancing. They kept their parks open. And also for the Aspetuck Land Trust, we have Jim Wood, a retired police officer from Fairfield, Connecticut, who will be speaking about their struggles in remaining open and how they managed to make it work. So again, these were 2 places that managed to stay open during the pandemic. So for the project in Burlington, they worked quickly using executive orders to create a social distancing campaign. It was led by the Department of Public Works. It was sort of a combination between the town and the Public Works Department. Instead of closing streets, they designed streets as local traffic only and others as shared streets. So they were very careful to include cars and cyclists and pedestrians to share the same street, encouraging slower, cautious driving. They did some temporary parking restrictions, and they really worked to develop a shared streets for social distancing campaign. And all these images are from their website, which you can, when this presentation is available, we'll PDF it and you can link to these. So, you know, they were very active in their campaign, getting the word out. And like I said, they used existing mayoral and gubernatorial executive orders to get things moving very quickly so they could roll it out pretty much as soon as they went into lockdown. They worked and used existing traffic plans to identify the best local roads to use. The roads needed to be sure that they didn't have a transit route on them. They needed to have sidewalks on both sides. And as Shauna mentioned earlier, they would use volunteers, as they had a very minimal budget. Their volunteers would check on cones, lawn signs, conduct outreach, do some online surveying. And with the surveying, they would get community feedback and they would adjust the program as they went along. So we saw a presentation with one of the representatives from the town speak about this, and it was very successful, and they're still actively working with it. So, you know, just wanted to share that information for you of how a municipality was able to roll something out quickly and completely, and it's still a work in progress. And now I'll briefly transition it over to Selectman Rosenthal, who'll speak briefly about what the town of Newtown did under their social distancing campaigns using the CodeRED system. So, Selectman Rosenthal, I think you are unmuted, so.
I think I am. Thank you, Stephanie.
Sure.
I appreciate your putting this together. So the town purchased its CodeRED system. You know, I've been in office, I'm in my 2nd term, probably 12 years ago now. So it actually has, it's grown. I think that, most, if not all, residents are subscribed. We have, we're a community of 28, almost 29,000. It has 21,000 numbers subscribed to it. So it is an emergency system. So that's kind of the balance where I tried to be judicious in the use of it. So when we were initially really trying to force the social distancing and trying to communicate a lot of information to folks, again, I think that system allows up to a 2.5-minute message. I tried to keep them all to 90 seconds or less. I think that no one wants to hear, me drone on for 2.5 minutes about social distancing or really anything for that matter. So I tried to keep it as limited as possible, but really kind of going into the whole social distancing effort, I felt strongly, and one of your slides touched on it, the wellness aspect. So we did have to shut our playing fields down, so some of our parks where it tends to be more playing field oriented. But, our health director, a number of folks in our emergency management team felt strongly that, we should keep our open spaces open to the extent possible. Because again, I think just mentally, we benefited in this pandemic, and I think I'm grateful that we had the weather that we did. Had we had a lot of snow and everything else, it would have been, would have probably closed our open spaces too, just by virtue of having bad weather. So we did benefit from having at least some sunshine, a reasonably good March, April. I mean, it rained some in May, but we did have at least the weather backdrop to do it. But we felt strongly keeping our open spaces open, at least it gives it gave us the ability not that we were trying to be big brothery, but to keep an eye on, kind of what people are up to. I think to think that if you close everything, that it won't just move into the backyards is kind of, I think, naive to think that won't happen. So I think the more you can kind of try to keep some of your amenities available, it allows people to get the social interaction that we're all wired for, but in a managed context. So I was in the habit of doing a CodeRED every week. Not every day. I think that we have to be mindful of that system as an emergency system. So if you start using it every day, it starts to become background noise, and people, when you really do have a true emergency to communicate, people may not pick up the phone. And it will leave recorded messages if you don't answer the phone. So I felt like that was a good way to get information out. So really in general on COVID and how the community was faring, but it allowed me to communicate a bit about our open spaces too. And we kept, the town owns a former state mental hospital, Fairfield Hills. It's a 180-acre campus. Just so happens our municipal center is also on the campus, but it has a 2-mile walking loop around it. And WestCOG has helped us keep track a bit of more recently on some trail counts. And what we're finding is, it's to the tune of 500 people come and use that every day. So certainly there was pressure among some folks that were nervous in the community about closing Fairfield Hills, but we kept it open. And I think that the community benefited from that. So to be able to see people out walking and enjoying family time, or maybe the company of one other person. Again, with the municipal center here, the kind of benefit was coming and going, we'd kind of notice just how crowded it was getting. But I'd rather have people walking on our open spaces and our trails than out on the roads. Newtown's like any other, Connecticut municipality. We have winding roads and a lot of woods and blind spots and everything else. So I'd rather have people enjoying things there where, maybe they're, we didn't want to push the limits on public health, but I think, we also had to be cognizant of people getting hurt out on our roadways. So, I did use the system to communicate with the public. If I saw that things were getting a little crowded here, maybe in that CodeRED conversation, I would mention that, look, these things are only going to stay open to the extent that people can use them responsibly. We did put signage out as well. So I think I saw on your presentation, the Farmington Canal signage. I suppose we borrowed that, but those were some of the signs that we had out. And we also spray painted signs on the trails. Just showing, what 6 feet look like and everything else every so often with chalk spray. So I think it worked well. And I think we were allowed to at least keep things open. And we do have a text system as well. So our Park and Rec department used that as we started to open facilities, we can still use that. I haven't done a CodeRED in a while, but I feel like it was a good way to stay in tune with the community. Again, not sounding too preachy, but just trying to communicate, good information to people.
Thank you so much, Selectman Rosenthal. This is fantastic information, and it's just so good to hear what local people have been doing, and with some of the things that have worked and not worked for them. And now I'll turn it.
Questions too when the time comes.
Sure. And now I'll turn it over to Jim Wood, who is working with the Aspetuck Land Trust, and he'll tell us a little bit about their issues with parking and how they, what they used, how they managed to stay open, and all of that. So thanks, Mr. Wood.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy that the Land Trust is included in this. It gives us an opportunity to try to explain what we did. Maybe somebody has some ideas on how we can fix some of these things too, but the Aspetuck Land Trust has nearly 2,000 acres of hikeable trails. The biggest one is the Trout Brook Valley in Easton and Weston, which is 1,009 acres of 20 miles of trails. And we're normally year-round busy. And COVID certainly wasn't going to help our parking situation and our social distancing situation. But up until now, all of the access online for Trout Brook Valley led everyone to Bradley Road in Weston, which is like a lane and a half wide, and it's a dead-end street with no turnaround. And so when everyone in the area began looking for an outdoor place to hike besides our regular folks, they drove down Bradley Road, and they were met with no place to turn around and a long line of cars. Even though we have 5 different entrances, all of the internet resources, all trails, and a lot of apps sent everybody to Bradley Road. So we started with putting up temporary handwritten signs, which most people look at as being, well, not really official, they're not printed out or anything, so maybe they're not for real. And it's expensive for a land trust with little resources to buy new signs. So luckily, at the time, the land trust had an intern, a college intern, who she went to work contacting all of these assorted apps, including the DEP app. The DEP app, we have part of our property at Trout Brook Valley is owned by the state, but managed by the land trust. And it includes state forests. So when the state began closing parking lots and different areas, people would look to the DEP site for a place that was open. It indicated Trout Brook Valley, Forest, Bradley Road, more cars. So that intern helped out a lot to start to reorganize the different apps. And we had people coming from all kinds of places. Yep, that's our map that's available at all the kiosks have those maps that you can take with you. She went to work, and we had people from everywhere. We even had a group of people, came in 3 cars, 8 people from New York City who were visiting from Nepal. And they went on the internet to look for a real hiking trail somewhere close to them, and drove up from New York City to find that the town of Weston, because of the parking situation, had closed our Bradley Road parking lot. The emergency management decided that because so many people were parking on the street in front of no parking signs, that they had to close the parking lot. So it took us a couple of weeks just to get that parking lot open weekdays, and it took 2 or 3 months to get it open on weekends. But again, everybody was sent to Bradley Road. So here we have these Nepalese hikers that want to go hiking, and hopefully I was there to give them directions to another parking area. We had people coming from Massachusetts and Connecticut that wanted to join up. Some were halfway between, and they read in an article that Trout Brook Valley was a great hiking place. So we had just countless numbers of cars coming in. The town of Weston resurrected one of those electronic solar electronic signs. They're not a big municipality, and we asked them for some resource, and they repaired their solar sign, and we got that out to indicate that there was no parking on the street. That kind of helped the problems, some of the problems with the neighbors. So we did our best to get to work to start to reorganize some of the parking areas. And rather than me, I would much prefer to not just stand in the parking lot giving directions to other parking areas. I'd rather interact with so many people, parents that were showing up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because school was out at home, and they just needed to get out. And I'd rather steer those people I'd rather send an 8-year-old to go look at the beaver den than to spend my time giving directions to parking lots. We had a 9-year-old that would come one day with his mother and the next day with his father, and would critique the trails. A 9-year-old critiquing the difficulty of our trails was tremendous. That's what the Land Trust is all about, having these giving the people the opportunity to really enjoy nature. We also have allow biking, mountain biking, and we had to delay that opening. We close up during the winter to let the trails heal. And so we were faced with delaying that for a couple of weeks for a couple of reasons. One, to let the trails heal a little more, and the other, the social distancing aspect. You know, right away, as soon as some COVID regulations started coming out, the executive director, David Brandt, and the board began to make up signage for each of the kiosks to indicate that we had a COVID policy and to remind people of social distancing. So if you had bikes and hikers on the trail, you know, they had to work it out to see who was going to have the right of way. Nobody wants to step off a hiking trail into the woods. We have to deal with ticks. So a hiking trail isn't a 1-lane or 2-lane road. They're actual hiking trails. So, and then we're dog friendly. Trout Brook Valley allows dogs on leash, and once the local municipalities began to close down their parks and open space areas, social media lit up with, but we still have Trout Brook Valley. So everybody started to meet up at Trout Brook Valley, which increased our load of dog walkers tremendously, just tremendously. So we unfortunately had to stop dog-friendly policy temporarily, which disappointed all of our regulars, plus all the folks that didn't have an area to go to with their dogs. Very disappointing, because we are a dog-friendly park. So we had to come up with new signage for the dog folks and new signage for the bike people, and try to relocate the parking areas. All unseen before, you know, we hadn't had to deal with all of this before, but we've got some things straightened out now, and hopefully we won't have to use this too often.
Thank you so much. This is, again, fantastic information for us to hear and to have. And so before we close and I turn it back over to Shauna and we do a little Q&A, I just wanted to note some case studies, takeaways from the things we've heard today and some of the things we've researched. Again, using existing plans, traffic plans, to help determine your best routes to modify, phased approaches. We heard both Selectman Rosenthal and Mr. Wood talk about, you know, they started in certain, they started small and expanded as people became accustomed to the changes. We talked about creative campaigning, using signage and murals, and working with advocacy groups and volunteers and interns, since we have low budgets, working quickly and engaging our advocacy groups as well for people who really support you and want to get the word out. Since we really can't meet face-to-face during a lot of these times, we, feedback surveys using social media or emails, even phone calls for those people who are not internet friendly, even texting, and adding to advocacy group mailing lists. Actually, one of our colleagues at FHI is on the mailing list for Aspetuck Land Trust and forwarded an email he received about the parking issue at Troutbrook Valley. So it was very useful. So he didn't have to deal with that. Our colleague went and parked somewhere else. And then considering the vulnerable, like for some of these street closures, are some of these plans, might they be limiting access for some residents, say a senior center, are they able to walk to where they need to go? Closing the roads, or sharing the streets, are we making sure they're accessible to wheelchairs and walkers and people who may not drive and people who take transit? We just want to make sure we consider them. And then some of these things that have happened, especially in larger cities where we've had roads closed and we've had more pedestrian friendly areas, they're fantastic and people love it. So, it's always nice to think in the back of our minds, could some of these changes be made permanent and, really engage people more with walking in their communities and getting to know their neighborhoods more. So there's sort of a silver lining to a lot of this stuff. So we really appreciate all of the time. I'll pass it over to Shauna. Just a quick heads up. We don't have the chat enabled right now because of Zoom bombing. I'm sorry it's had to be so stringent. We've turned off video, but it's just kind of what has to be right now. But if you want to raise your hand, if you have a question, I'll be managing it and turning it over to Shauna now. So thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody for participating and those in the audience for listening and your interest in this topic. We'll open it up now to questions. I'm very proud. I have my timer going. We're at 46 and a half minutes. I feel like we nailed the timing. So we have some time for questions, or if you don't have a question, but you have a comment about something that you did or was successful, or something that you wish you would have done differently in hindsight. I think, I'd like to just kind of open up the floor for others to share or ask. And any question I can't answer, I will either pass to Jim or Dan or WestCOG. So.
And I'm hoping that, Shauna, could you raise your hand just to make sure I can see it and that it works? I'm pretty sure. Yes. Okay, good. All right. So we have, our WestCOG has raised their hand, so I know I can see it. Excellent. So if other people have any questions for us or for Dan or for Jim, but just let us know. And I'm going to be monitoring the hands that are raised. So far, I don't see anything. So, and once I see your raised hands, I will be able to unmute you, so you can ask a question or make a comment. Okay. Okay. We have Alan. I've asked to unmute you, Alan, so you can ask your question. I've asked if you can just unmute yourself so we can hear you.
Okay, just not a question, just a comment. I'm the park ranger for the town of Beacon Falls and work closely with our public works department. And we ended up going back probably about 5 weeks ago, posting social distancing trail etiquette signs. And although I can't show you what we have on camera, but it says, when enjoying our park, please be respectful and courteous to others and follow social distancing guidelines. If you arrive at the park and crowds are forming, choose a different park or trail or return another day. Observe the CDC's minimum recommendation for social distancing when walking, biking, fishing, hiking, or other activity. Wearing a face mask is encouraged when you cannot meet the social distancing guidelines. Warn other trail users of your presence. Allow proper distances as you pass and step off the trail to allow others to pass if needed. So basically, We made some 8.5 by 11 laminated sheets and post them through our various parks, which remained open for hiking, not the rec park. And then later on, we ended up putting lawn signs in, which probably made it more visible to the people. So basically, that's what we did in our town.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
I love that it was positive and encouraging and like, hey, here's some guidelines for, you know, coming back on another day or finding another spot. I did want to throw out, because I didn't wedge this into my slides, but I know that of at least one land trust in Connecticut, they did lawn signs and there was a QR code on the lawn sign. It was like, enjoying our land trust, click here to donate. And I think, you know, obviously this does require more, you know, resources to set up, but I think as more people are out, and this is another good way to like raise awareness, like, hey, this is one of the resources that has stayed open and that the public has enjoyed, like it might be a good time to support it if you're able to. So just another way maybe to, you know, use those signs effectively. But thanks, Ellen.
And I think we have WestCOG. Kristen, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, hi, this is Kristen Hedges-Solianos. I'm a senior planner at WestCOG. I just wanted to take the opportunity while we're waiting for some other questions to come in to quickly thank Jim Wood and Selectman Rosenthal for joining today's call and sharing some of the strategies that they implemented to help keep these really important resources open in our region. So for those of you who don't know, WestCOG is a council of governments. One of our primary roles is transportation planning for 18 municipalities in Western and Southwestern Connecticut. So a large part of that includes active transportation. Trail planning, bike and ped planning is a large part of our work program. We continue to collect data on trails. It was mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're rolling out a trail counting program. We're doing that at Fairfield Hills in Newtown currently. We also have equipment to collect GPS information and coordinates on our trails in our region. And Shauna mentioned earlier, there is the CT Trail Census, who are currently working on the CT Trail Finder, which is going to be a really great resource in Connecticut that's hopefully rolled out in the next year or so. So WestCOG will continue to help coordinate on some of those efforts. So if there's anyone on the call today, any municipalities in our regions, or any land trusts or other stakeholders who have any questions about trail planning, please don't hesitate to reach out to the COG. We have staff who can help assist with some of those efforts. So again, just wanted to thank everyone for today's call and joining in.
Thank you, Kristen. And I don't see any other questions or any other hands raised right now. Selectman Rosenthal or Mr. Wood, did you guys have any final comments you wanted to make before we close the meeting?
Hey, the land trust stayed open.
Against all odds. Against all odds.
Everybody was closing. We stayed open.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I share the same thing. I mean, I won't judge another community by what the things that, you know, their leaders had to do, because again, everyone's trying to manage public health. And, you know, I think had a unique set of circumstances with our open spaces and felt like we could keep them open. I think other folks were dealing with crowds and everything else and had to make decisions, but I am happy that we were able to keep our properties open and then, you know, layer things back on, you know, over time. And I feel like, you know, we're all, because of everyone's collective efforts across the state, Connecticut's in the position that it is now. And obviously we want to keep it that way. But I think this is certainly a helpful forum, and thank everyone for making me a part of it.
Fantastic. Shauna, did you want to add anything else?
Sure, I'll just close by if, you know, if you are a municipality or a COG, you know, if this has sparked any ideas for, you know, active transportation, either demonstration projects or education or procurement of, you know, bike racks or something like that in your community, I encourage you to reach out to Tim Malone at CROG. Like I mentioned, we're in year 2 of the funding. Obviously, CDC has a lot on its plate right now, but hopefully this program will continue and there'll still be you know, there's like money allocated for every region, and we've been working with many of the regions in Connecticut on some cool stuff. But you know, if you have any idea, I'd say reach out to CROG. That's it.
Thank you all so much. And Selectman Rosenthal and Mr. Wood, thank you again. This was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for participating.
My
Have
pleasure.
a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Stephanie.
I'm going to end it now. Okay.